And I Quote is bringing you expert-to-expert advice and insights. Our thought-provoking conversations with insurance industry professionals will inspire and educate our listeners on the latest trends and hot topics.
Let's move our industry forward together. The And I Quote podcast is brought to you by Coterie Insurance. Coterie is simplifying the way agents work with small business.
Now let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Today I am speaking with our very first return guest ever, Chris Cline. Yay! Welcome back, Chris.
Thank you. I figure you could not possibly have run through all the amazing talent and possible guests in the industry. So I don't know, it's pretty humbling to be invited back. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to have you. And just as a reminder, Chris is the executive director for the Big I Agency Council for Technology, and who's celebrating 25 years. Chris just shared that with me before we got started, which is awesome. So congratulations to you and the team and to the Big I. That's amazing to think that we've brought people together for 25 years to talk about technology for agents.
Yeah, it is fascinating. We're in the middle. As soon as we're done recording today, we're going to do some materials where we do a look back and bring Jeff Yates and Ron Berg back into the fold. You know, really the folks that created the whole thing and built it. And so I'm just very fortunate to have a chance to steward it for, my time. So it's really neat, but amazing. It's been 25 years.
Yeah. I'm really interested to see the timeline. It wasn't until like 2015. So maybe, 9-ish years ago, we started talking about InsurTech, but ACT's been around much longer. So that will be really fun to kind of relive. Most of my career actually falls within that. So yeah.
Well, it's true. I mean, I've been in the industry right around 30 years, but wasn't involved at all on the technology side of things. So I wouldn't have had any optics into this. I wrote a little bit of a piece of content for our social media that, look back at what happened in 25 years ago. It was 1999, right? Is that right? Yeah. And so think about that. We were planning for Y2K.
Yeah. I was graduating high school.
Okay. I was not. I was not. I was like in the marketing department at the carrier I worked for and was writing a series of Y2K articles for the agency newsletter. And of course that was, a lot of hype. I'm not horribly dissimilar to kind of what we're going through right now. Like we know it's coming, when you think about AI, I mean, it doesn't have, maybe a slightly different dynamic for sure, but like what's going to happen? Like there's this existential kind of thing attached to it as well. And everybody was prepping and wrapping their arms around Y2K and fixing things. But at the end of the day, like elevators didn't fall to the floor and airplanes didn't fall out of the sky. And somehow or another, we all, moved on with our lives.
Last time you were here, we talked a lot about implementing a technology strategy and how that adds value to insurance agents, the future of their agency and their customers, right? But during that episode, you mentioned that you were going to be releasing a book that's now officially published. Congratulations again. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you very much.
So I know it's available on Amazon on hardcover, paperback, Kindle, and audio, right? We used to call them books on tape, but now we call them audiobooks. And that also dates us.
Get out your Walkman.
Dive in a little bit, pick your brain about, what legacy means to you, professional and personal development. And maybe we start by just talking a little bit about what motivated you to want to write on this topic.
Yeah, so it's called Inertia of Legacy. I probably should be a shameless plug. There it is. Thank you,
there
Robbie.
It is.
That's
You're
right.
welcome.
The check's in the mail, all 13 cents. The concept, without the words, dates back quite a while. 6, 7, 8 years at least. I'm a science junkie. I wasn't good at it probably in school, or we'd be having this conversation through a different filter. But with the advent of podcasts, I started to dive back into my love of science, and things were a little bit more fringy than what I got to do for my day job. And started to have these, I drove an hour to work one way and spent a decent amount of time, traveling for work So I was consuming a lot. And at some point in that journey, I realized that, or had to started to think about these thoughts when I was listening to science stuff, that if we made a leap, you could connect these dots and translate the learnings or the principles to our personal or professional lives. And some of them were way more out there and wacky than others. So I started to jot down these ideas of things that I thought would be fascinating to connect science, physics, astronomy to, stuff that's right in the middle of our daily lives. And what can we learn about those? Or what would it look like if we took this concept and juxtapositioned it right on top of our industry or whatever? So those were things I was starting to jot down. Inertia was one of them. Newton's laws. There's 8 or 9 of them. And so I had this daydream that I might write a book one day, or I don't know, maybe do a keynote or something like this, where this was to be kind of one and done. But the idea at this time was like each one of these weird ideas would just be a chapter, and it would be sort of like a vignette. But I noticed in our industry, we had procured the word legacy and applied, in some cases, a negative connotation to that.
Yeah.
And so we hear that in legacy software, and that's not friendly. It usually means slow, out of date, clunky, not as, connected to the future. And I started to notice as an industry using that and relating to legacy agencies, legacy carriers, legacy employees. And, it was trying to be polite when referring to highly tenured, maybe more advanced, comfort and stable in your points of view, and less likely to embrace change. And I didn't particularly care for that. And I actually got called out by an agent friend at one point. Like, you don't want to do that. Don't call somebody a legacy agent. And so these things came together, and I was just listening again to another podcast or something where we're talking about Newton's laws. And I realized, like, if I don't like something, I can change it. I can do something different, and I can apply a different set of behaviors. And then just sort of prophetically, I'm listening to Newton's laws, and it's like, hey, it's similar to, if an object is in motion and you don't do anything about it, it's going to stay in motion. So if I don't like the word legacy, do something about it. And so it's kind of a long way around of saying that it just sort of coalesced, that I started to think about this idea of Newton's laws of motion as it relates to business and what we might be able to think about. And I'm a big passion of emotional intelligence and personal and professional development, and like, what does it mean to really explore who you are and what you want to be and be clear about that? And I can't really like pinpoint a specific moment in time, but I just had this epiphany that, like, you can be your own inertia, which is taking liberties with the definition, I admit, but and do something about that. And I wanted to explore it. So I started to jot notes down, and it became clear to me that there was something developing for me a number of years ago, but I felt like I didn't quite have an objective way to articulate it in a way that made sense. So it just became an exercise in journaling, which I'm a huge fan of.
I think you have a really good audience too that's going to be listening in. And I am really guilty of using legacy when I talk about our industry.
I do it every day too, right? And so, I mean, this is a fascinating thing. Like, so it is a little bit of an indictment of the word, but it's a personal thing, right? And it's hard to change.
Yeah. Like, maybe we can be the like impetus of change, and like, what word do we pick when we talk about like well-established carriers or agencies that have been in market for a really long time that might need a little force, right? To kind of change the direction, but have it not be so like, or even slightly condescending. Here we're ideating in a podcast, right?
Well, that's okay. And I mean, I believe in noble intent until proven otherwise. And whatever the genesis of using legacy in that context was, I don't believe was intended to be negative, but you could just start to see the narrative around it, and you and I are both very active inside our industry on social media, and the narrative wasn't recognizing these folks as being, highly tenured, highly polished, having built successful businesses. It was, hey, those legacy carriers or those legacy agencies or the legacy people within them are the reasons why we're not advancing fast enough. And so I think whatever word we use, it without, real intention and an effort to deploy it in a meaningful way runs the risk of the same way, which is just a labels issue to begin with. And that's a whole other podcast conversation, but labels do as much to divide as they do to bring things together. And so whatever word we use, I'm fine with, so long as we kind of keep the spirit of it in mind. So if that's Pollyanna and naive, I'm willing to own that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to start thinking on that. And I'm going to start to try to be more aware of when I'm using that term, just because of our conversations. Thank you.
For what it's worth, I try to use the word incumbent or high tenured.
Yeah. Well, so to that point, Chris, like, do you have any thoughts on like what, well-established agencies can do to help reframe their thinking to empower and change the industry? I just think about the book and the conversation that we just had. Like, how can we, like, knowing that a lot of our audience is going to be our agency partners and some tech partners and maybe some carrier folks that want to listen in, but like, what can we do to help reframe thinking around that?
Well, yeah, I guess we could probably pick a couple different swim lanes there, but I think the starting with where we really are. I mean, some of the big eye data just came out, and some of the studies. I mean, the industry's on the agency side is pretty healthy. I mean, I think studies just showed that the average agency EBITDA 23 points. Organic growth is the highest since 2009. Now, some of that is very much influenced by the hard market and what's happening with renewal prices. And so, but even if that normalizes a little bit, so, it starts to kind of lead us to a path of, if you're leading an organization that's having profit margins as good as you've ever had, growing as well as you have in a very long time, it's worth as much as it's ever been. I think you have to start with a real question is, like, why would somebody change?
Yeah.
And so the conversation I have there is, let's recognize that you've built a phenomenal business, the generic you, the broad you, and that's amazing. And so one of the great things about our industry is I don't think there's an agency on record that's ever gone out of business because they didn't adopt a new piece of technology.
Yes.
Or they didn't do A, B, or C, right? It's not just about tech, but the world is changing faster than ever. And at some point, you're going to want to perpetuate this internally, hopefully hand it off and carry your legacy forward if you wish. Because we know there are many, many options out there that if an agent wants to or needs to sell, they can sell it for a very nice price and move on. And so thinking about a dynamic where carrying that forward and keeping employees in good space and the image and the brand, and again, the legacy that the firm has in the community and the customers they serve, starting to think about what it looks like down the road and letting that next generation have more influence and decision making over the capabilities and the decisions that are being made is a way of starting to get in front of this tidal wave, I guess, that's coming. We're chatting before we hit the record button. We're thinking about AI, right? Like, so it's a long way around. I'm saying, like, just recognize that what we've done forever isn't always going to be what will make us successful in the future. But it's not as broken as some would like to say. It's just not it's not an excuse or a reason to, like, leave our heads in the sand, though. But understanding where you are and having a starting point and what that really means is the most important step when you start to think about what change looks like. There's that old analogy, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there.
Yep.
I like to flip that, saying, if you don't know where you are, you can't possibly get to where you want to be because you can't plot a path forward. And so getting really right with who you are today and being honest about what that is, capabilities, talent, business model, mix of business, personal beliefs, whatever that is, it's critical whether you're leading a business or whether you're an individual. When you think about, how do I remain viable, more successful, whatever the goal might be, it starts with getting really clear and right with who you are and what that means.
Yeah. In the data, I don't know if you got this granular in your surveys, but do you see any common threads amongst those agencies that are actually exceeding the industry average. Like everybody's doing great, right? But who's doing the best, and what's the delta between those that are average and those that are in the 90th, 100th percentile?
Yeah, we could slice that up a little bit, but there definitely are meaningful changes when you look at operating results, organic growth,
Yeah.
and there is a size proxy. It's really fascinating, and this is Chris Cline. This is not anything to do. These are my opinions. But having worked in the distribution space for quite a while on the carrier side, working with a lot of the leading consulting firms and consuming this data, very, very meaningful sort of plateaus that agencies go through that tend to have a revenue proxy
Yeah.
for where they are and to get past them. And I think this is very real from an operational perspective. It becomes, are you willing to relinquish control, take on another shareholder? Are you willing to invest in an operations leader or a technology officer, a CFO, something along those lines that are roles that are pricey, that don't have a historical connection to direct sales, right? They're not really viewed as somebody who sells and services insurance,
Yeah.
but they become a critical next step in order to have the organization move to the next sort of spot on the sophistication of the business and empower growth. Those are operational choices that are attached to a strategy. I've been thinking a lot about this through the lens of culture. And so a lot of organizations to go from where they are over the 5 million bump, over the 10 million bump and up, especially when you go to that, you think about the vast majority of agencies in the US are in this like 8 to 15, maybe 20 employee range.
Mm-hmm.
To get over that hump requires transparency. It requires relinquishing control. It requires being willing to standardize philosophy and to cascade messaging and to define behaviors and to be clear about what experience you want your employees and your customers to have. So these are cultural components that are really important. And I think I'm going down this path because they do tie to legacy. It's what do you want your business to be known as and remembered as you work your way through. And it's hard to do, right? Because when it's a small organization and the business alpha and omega is you, the person whose name is on the door.
Yep.
Some of these other things don't matter as much. But when you start to have multiple locations, people working remotely, internally, different generations, you start to stratify and do different things when it comes to niches or different types of business you want to write. You have to let go of some of these things and start to think more about what's the experience like that the team you're building will have? What's the experience you can define to your customers? And then to drive that down through operating things like job descriptions and performance management and goal setting. And that's really, really hard because whether we like it or not, the tough love in that is as you get to a certain point, leading it where all the decisions kind of start and stop in one place isn't permissible. And so when you look at really large organizations, at some point along the way, this is another scientific principle called the great filter. And it's sort of a metaphor for a filter that any sort of species or society or organization has to get through to achieve its ultimate success. Large successful organizations, one way or another, got over this hump and they divide responsibilities and accountabilities and start to trust different people to drive a clearer vision through. And to get past a certain point, you have to be willing to do that. And so that's a long, long answer to the point, but like it takes an internal gut check. And again, it ties back to legacy. Where are you now? And are you really willing to put on paper what you want to be as a person or a business owner? And then do the needed work to get there. And that's what I was missing objectively in the book was I can talk about inertia, legacy, and how do you manage your own sort of effort and energy and what are the external forces? I mean, that was really esoteric. And so the book, as I think you've read, the big chunk of it is a quadrant view where it takes effort and energy and the health of a legacy and puts it on paper so that now you can take these two seemingly odd and disparate concepts and plot them on a map. And with a set of honesty, you can kind of figure out where you are as a person or a business owner And then you can start to figure out how to define what you want to be next and what may be necessary to get there.
Yeah. I love that. I think a lot of times we talk about all of the business objectives and goals and principles and the business strategy and you know where do we want to be and what do we want our financials to look like in 3 to 5 years, but rarely do we talk about like how do we massage the culture and the people, change our leadership as a leadership team in order to get to where we want to go, right? And that's like I often talk about like we're always working in the business, let's work on the business, but then
Yeah.
it's almost like let's work on the leadership, to work on the business, to work in the business, right? And it's adding a different layer of thought to how do you grow from an agency that might be 5 people to 20 people. My experience leading a team of 8 is a lot different than leading a team of 50, right?
Yeah.
And you have to empower and trust and kind of pull yourself out and let the team work together, and just make sure you're there for jump balls and guidance, right? It's a very different way of approaching growing a business. And to your point, like your book takes a lot of, I would say, builds a lot of self-awareness and humility into any individual that's reading it, and to think through, well, how can I act differently to make sure that my team and my business is set up for success in the best ways.
I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I think there's a part in the book where I acknowledge, like in the middle of writing it, where I'm like, I might be writing like an average emotional intelligence book. So if somebody mistook this for something around emotional intelligence, I guess I would be honored. But it's just trying to bake, all of that together in a unique way. And folks that have read it have kind of, the first thing they've said was in the introduction where I personally became vulnerable, easy for me to say, vulnerable with 3 events in my life where I didn't even realize I was doing something to influence what would ultimately be a part of the legacy that I have. And that, if that sounds arrogant to say that I have a legacy, I encourage everybody listening to this to say that out loud, because every single person listening to this, or every person and every business in the world will leave a legacy. And so it's a matter of whether you care enough about that to do something about it, and to define it, and to lead your life in a way, or to run your business in a way that gives that legacy the best chance, or the desired legacy the best chance to come to fruition. So not everybody, you think about legacy and you think about, oh, Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or, some, other philanthropic type thing, or somebody who's a train wreck, but we're all leaving one. And it's not just how much money you leave your family, upon, the end of your time here. It's, there's a vibe to this that is really important to wrap your head around. But your point about those operational decisions, I know we're kind of bouncing around this a little bit, but to get to that next level, you've got to trust other people to help carry it forward. And to trust somebody to carry it forward implies that you have to have defined the it. And made it articulate and clear, and created a framework by which somebody can carry that forward. And at least then have an intentional decision about whether or not they want, and when they want, to start to put their own spin on that. And that's what the quadrant dynamic has helped me articulate. And so, and we came up with some creative names that play on physics, but if you look at this real quickly in the upper, so this takes the overall health, and clarity of one's legacy on one axis, and the amount of effort and energy to putting into define it and leading it in the other. And so in the bottom left, you get perilously inert, which is a quadrant that is designed to capture people and businesses that have an undefined or a horrible current legacy, and they're doing nothing about it or don't care. The opposite, in the upper right, uniform motion, is a healthy and defined and well-articulated legacy, and efforts and energy are aligned with that intention to bringing it to life. And so those we can probably think about, right? You immediately thought about people or a business in your life that fits there. Hopefully it's one not the perilously inert. Hopefully everybody's driving towards uniform motion. But those other two, Bobby, I believe is where many of us live. And so this building momentum and uncertain stability creates this dynamic where they're really fascinating. And I think we all go through different quadrants in different portions of our personal and professional lives. And so you might have a great legacy and be doing wonderful things and all your behaviors are aligned. I think about myself, but I changed careers. So I cashed some of that in. Now it was undefined.
Yep.
I was building something anew. So I, by default, moved to a different spot because I had this cachet with me, but what I was going to do here is different. And I might have had all the intentions and the effort and energy to do it. But by default, I had to change where I was at and the way I was thinking about what effort I put into it and what other forces I would have to acknowledge and reckon with to bring myself back. And then there's another quadrant where maybe you just kind of get your crap together and say, I want to be better.
Yeah.
So that the intention is there, but you're starting from a spot where maybe nobody knows who you are. They don't know what you're about as a person or a business. And that's what I think this translates so well to both people as individuals and businesses.
Chris, I think that's what I truly enjoyed about the way you wrote this is oftentimes we're told that things are important, right? Like legacy is important. Change management is important. Diversity inclusion is important, but we're not giving a framework or a tool set to show you how do you actually take what we know is now important and put it into action in your lives or in your business. Right. And so giving a toolkit basically for individuals or businesses to change who they are and change the direction of their legacy was awesome. So I'm just giving you big kudos. And I really mean that, not because we're friends, but because I think you just did a good job of setting it up in a way for people to actually have a meaningful impact on their lives personally, professionally, and on their businesses too. So. Well, I'm going to wrap up with maybe a deep question, but Chris, how would you define the legacy that you built, and how does this book play into that? I'm just curious.
Hopefully, the book is viewed a part of the legacy. I'll try to be brief. Like you referenced. I'm glad you mentioned that, so it doesn't sound so like a passive answer. But I've been in every part of that quadrant as well, and I think everybody would like to believe they're in the great quadrant of perfect and clear definition and all the effort and energy. But it's just, once everybody soul searches, I think you realize that's just not true. So I'm working to get back into that spot. I hope that if we had to summarize, I guess, horrible to say this, right? 'Cause some people feel like when they're talking about their legacy, that it's also their epitaph on their, at their funeral. But I would love to be viewed as a champion for outliers and underdogs.
Yeah.
And some of that is explored in the book, and some of the more pivotal points in my life were where I was truly an outlier. And, at the time we didn't have a really great word like imposter syndrome to describe that for folks. But I really was that, and the discomfort and the lack of not belonging and the silencing that it took that it put over people, over me, was pretty profound, and continuing to chip away, and truly blessed to have had a handful of phenomenal mentors and champions and coaches and sponsors throughout the year that appreciated that I connect dots in different ways. I see things maybe a little differently, not better or worse, just differently. But it became in more recent years a real conviction of mine to be a part of any body of work that helps people who are different in any way than the norm have a voice, and to have the voice they deserve to have. I just would love to be viewed as a mentor, somebody who's been that. There are people in my life who I am absolutely better off of because they were in my life. I would love for if just one person believed that about me, it would be magical. Not for an ego. It would just mean that my efforts to try to help have helped somebody. And then, of course, I think if put on truth serum when I'm not around, my wife, my son, my parents all said, yeah, we have a great family, a great teammate here.
Yeah. I love that. Well, and I can say some of the things that you hope for, you've already built. And I've experienced that firsthand myself or through folks that you've touched along the way in your career. So
Well,
in some ways, Chris, congratulations for building an awesome legacy. And yeah, continue on that path. And I'm really excited that you came back and shared some thoughts around this topic and we're able to promote you and your book a little bit more, because I do think that for anyone who's feeling a little bit lost, this could kind of set them back on the path that they really want to be on. So
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming back again. Last time you were on, I asked you this question, and I'm going to ask it again because I want to see if it changed.
Okay.
What's your walk-up song? If you're an MLB player and you're walking up to the plate and you just want to crush a home run, like what's the song that's going to get you pumped up, and has that changed?
I don't think it's changed. I don't know what I said the last time. So, and I'm a bit of a music junkie, and maybe part of my late life legacy stuff too. As you can see the guitar on the wall, I now play live music and do little, kind of bar acoustic sets. But the song that like always jazzes me is "The Way It Is" by Tesla.
I love it. I love it. I don't know did you say that last time? I'm going to have to go back and watch the end of our last podcast and see if it's the same.
It probably changes on our mood, but
yeah.
That song always comes back. I know for a fact I did a speaking engagement at an event that was at a famous concert venue in Cleveland and a couple years ago, and The Way It Is was my walk-up song. So they kind of
I love that.
It's not fictitious, and at least once in my life, it was not fictitious.
I love that. Well, Thanks, Chris. Always a pleasure. Best of luck with the book, and have fun celebrating 25 years for ACT. That's amazing.
I appreciate that. And thank you. Personal support and friendship and the partnership Coterie brings to ACT, and podcasts and shows like this. I mean, I think it's a really neat way that you weave in what your organization does and your passions about the industry, but also just give voices that really showcase the unique personalities in our industry. And I was just saying this the other day that, we all get to do some really cool things, you and I in our jobs. But the biggest part of what makes those really cool things are the people.
Absolutely.
And you're right there. Knuckle bump.
Yeah, knuckle bump. I had an old boss. She's one of my favorites. She always said it's all about the people. It's all about the people, and the business will all come together as long as you invest in the people. So awesome. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Bobby. Thanks, everybody.
Coterie is continuously innovating to bring our partners and agents the best solution for their small commercial book of business. Check out our producers resources page by clicking the link in the show notes below.